We like to think of football as being somehow sacred. In a game of fine margins, the beauty of the sport so often lies in its simplicity and unpredictability. Any doubt surrounding the legitimacy of the sport and of competition then renders the entire thing almost redundant, undermining the very tenets that have made football the most popular sport in the world. And yet, it is foolish to think that corruption and greed cannot get their grubby little hands on football. If those vices can infect every facet of society, from business to the arts and indeed governments, why should football be immune? Increasingly, corruption scandals, whether they be in terms of match fixing, financial irregularities or anything else, are becoming harder to sweep under the rug. So far this century, the Italian game has been sullied by the Koriopolis scandal, the English game has had not one but two corruption scandals, coming a decade apart, and football's very own governing body, FIFA, has been implicated in one of the great corruption scandals of the century. Of course, if FIFA isn't clean, it's only natural to ask, who is? Corruption in football most assuredly didn't start and end with Sepp Blatter and Chuck Blazer. In some parts of the world, this is even truer than in most. Much of Eastern Europe, Central Asia, and the Balkans has been plagued by lesser known and lesser reported corruption scandals over the years, with most, more often than not, going unpunished. Greek football has spent the last decade under a murky cloud of alleged corruption and match fixing on an epic scale. And it's one of those stories that I've always been aware of without ever really having been able to nail down the facts. Upon further inspection, it is easy to see why I, and perhaps many of you, might also have that impression, because the controversies within the Greek game involve a web of deceptions, allegations, investigations, and even supposed assassinations, so this video was not a simple one to research, though I'll do my best to try and relay some of the key facts. Before I start, for legal reasons if nothing else, I feel it is important to stress that in this video, I'm going to talk about the accusations which have largely been made to Greek courts surrounding issues of corruption and other criminal investigations, many of which either are yet to be ruled on by a court or have been dismissed by judges or juries. It is important to caveat that with the fact that courts can make errors, justice systems are imperfect, and some might suggest that Greek courts are not without particular blemishes in recent years. That is not to say that anyone is innocent or guilty, far be it from me to make that kind of judgment. It is just to clarify that I'll be laying out evidence that has been heard by courts and their rulings, and then you can make up your own minds as to what you believe, should you end up with any strong beliefs at all. Okay, with that rather large disclaimer out of the way and taken fully into consideration, sit down, strap in and join me on a journey through the murky waters of a Hellenic corruption scandal which may leave you with more questions than answers. Typically, when I'm researching one of these types of videos, there is a certain incident or moment to hone in on as an obvious starting point. A smoking gun, if you like. That isn't really possible in the case of Greek football, and particularly in the investigations into Greece's biggest club, Olympiacos. Just as you think you've found a thread you can really nail down, you find yourself on a tangent reading about burner phones, loan players being used as pawns, and the seizure of more than 2 tons of heroin by the DEA. But more on that later on. Whilst it is far from a starting point, 2011 was certainly a seminal year in terms of the controversies of the Greek game reaching boiling point. It began with a relatively minor scandal within the grand scheme of Greek football in a game between the eternal enemies of Panathinaikos and Olympiacos. Sometimes referred to as the mother of all derbies, games between Olympiacos and Panathinaikos are among the most heated and intense within the European game. In February 2011, tensions came to a head once again, when Panathinaikos felt that the referee had made a series of dubious decisions favouring Olympiacos, resulting in them losing the game 2-1. French international and former Liverpool forward Djibril Cissé was one of the biggest names in Greek football at the time, and quite possibly the league's best player. At the end of the game, he became embroiled in a debate with Olympiacos owner Evangelos Marinakis before being beaten by Olympiacos fans. He launched an appeal to UEFA and the Hellenic Football Federation, or HFF, but Marinakis was found not guilty. Cissé was so outraged by the arbitration process and by the refereeing within the Greek game that he swore to depart Greek football at the end of the season. And sure enough, he stayed true to his word, signing for Lazio at the end of the 2010-11 campaign. This was a big deal. Panathinaikos are the second most successful and second best supported team in Greece and the most popular team within the capital city of Athens. Cissé was their captain and star player. He was adored by fans, and whilst his criticisms of Greek referees was nothing new, he was a household name and a current French international at the time, so his voice was heard louder than most. When I say his criticism was nothing new, by the way, it's probably worth taking a quick moment to elaborate on that point. Greek football has been mired by match fixing and accusations of illegal activity, basically, since Plato established the academy 387 years before the birth of Christ. Corruption plays such an important role in Greek football, the Greeks even have their own word for it, paranga, used to describe any kind of manipulation of the HFF, of club presidents, coaches, players, referees, and just about anyone else who might be able to have any kind of impact upon the outcome of a game. In 1975, Panathinaikos were accused of being on the right side of a thrown match in the semi-finals of the Greek Cup when Herakles scored a bizarre own goal against them. In 1982, Herakles were involved once again, this time accusing their opponents of having offered them bribes. In the 1990s, a TV host shared a secret recorded conversation between Thomas Mitropoulos and a Greek Super League referee in which the Olympiacos board member and Egalio's shareholder appeared to state, "Hey, don't you worry about a thing. We want Olympiacos and Egalio to win, the others can go f*** themselves." This kind of controversy is so common within Greek football that scandal has become the league's default position, but Cisse's very vocal criticism and elaborate departure made more of a stir than most. It was in June 2011 that official accusations were made though, and a scandal known as Koriopolis, a title given by the Greek press in order to mimic Italy's Calciopoli scandal, really began to gather momentum. The investigation hadn't been triggered by any of the myriad of complaints made by club presidents or players, but rather it was due to irregular betting patterns having been spotted by UEFA in 2009 and 2010, mostly on Greek Cup and Second Division fixtures. They passed their concerns over to Greek authorities, who launched their own investigation, resulting in a damning 130-page document detailing vast amounts of corruption within the Greek game, with several key figures within the Greek game having been implemented. Immediate action was taken. Greek Super League sides Olympiacos Volos and Kavala would face enforced relegations to the Football League, whilst both of their chairmen were slapped with lifelong bans from football. Upon appeal, it was decided that both teams would face points deductions instead, but they were subsequently denied a Super League licence and forced to start from scratch in the 4th tier of the Greek game. These were the internal findings and internal punishments administered by the HFF, rather than criminal prosecutions, and they look set to continue into 2012, potentially targeting bigger fish than Volos and Kavala. There was no bigger fish than Olympiacos and their owner, Evangelos Marinakis, and the heat appeared to be ramping up on both club and official. That was until February 2012, when the HFF's 2 chief prosecutors were replaced and the investigation and scandal was swiftly brought to a halt, never to be reopened. The decision to replace the 2 prosecutors who had been scouring the case came about due to an agreement between Greece's Super League and the HFF following the election of Georgios Saras as president of the Hellenic Football Federation in early 2012. Saras is considered by some to be a puppet of Olympiacos' owner, Evangelos Marinakis, who also owns Nottingham Forest, and there have been accusations that Marinakis rigged his election win in order to have a more favourable voice towards both him and Olympiacos at the head of the HFF. During the criminal prosecutions, which began in 2015, a court heard that Marinakis and a number of other key figures within the Greek game had met in Athens in December 2011 and decided that they would work to get Saras elected as the HFF's new president, with Marinakis effectively then being able to control the organisation from the outside. Once they were successful in getting Saras elected, as it is alleged, the new president then took the executive decision to replace the HFF's 2 prosecutors and replace them with 2 prosecutors who either decided that the case was no longer worth pursuing or that there had been no wrongdoing, or both. In September 2012, the HFF even took the decision to award Olympiacos Volos with automatic promotion back into the 2nd division. Whether that all seems like too big of a coincidence, I shall let you decide. But either way, the events transpired to be extremely favourable for both Marinakis and Olympiacos given the prior trajectory of the investigations. As I said at the beginning of this video, it is difficult to nail down any specific time or event in terms of Greece's ongoing corruption scandal, but one name which keeps cropping up whichever reports you read is Evangelos Marinakis, and for good reason. Aside from anything else, Marinakis is one of, if not the most important figure within the Greek game, so a scandal involving Greek football is always likely to implicate him in some capacity. Since he is so crucial to understanding this story, and in unlocking any grains of truth, it's probably worth talking about him on an individual level. Marinakis is a Greek aristocrat, whose wealth goes back generations. His grandfather owned a metalworks in Crete, which became celebrated for manufacturing church bells. Many Cretan churches are still decorated with Marinakis family bells, in addition to churches throughout Europe, since the business exported bells primarily to mainland Greece, Italy, and France. When the Germans occupied Greece during World War II, Marinakis' family had their wealth seized, but they recovered their assets once the Nazis had been defeated. His father moved from the metalworks business into ships and politics, and even a role at Olympiacos, a series of family traditions which Evangelos has continued. Evangelos is now one of the wealthiest people in Greece, with an estimated net worth of $630 million, the vast majority of which comes from his shipping businesses. It should be said that just as most of America's wealthiest people made their fortunes through tech, the richest Russians tend to have some involvement in mining, and the most affluent Arabs typically made their money through oil, in Greece, it is the shipping industry that tends to make the rich become super rich. And not just super rich, but super powerful. Marinakis ranks 21st among Greece's wealthiest individuals, and 15 of the 21 people on that list made the bulk or at least part of their fortune through shipping. Indeed, shipping is the most important industry in Greece, worth more than $20 billion annually to an economy in which many sectors lay in ruins since the 2007-08 debt crisis. With great wealth always comes increased power in terms of lawmaking and in the courts, but there is a feeling among some Greeks that the nation's shipping magnates act above the law in modern-day Greece, and are closer to crown princes and sultans in Gulf states than they are to your average oligarch. This is the framework, or perceived framework at least, within which Evangelos Marinakis has to be understood. His power within Greek football is almost hegemonic, but his authority outside of the sport is also immense. Marinakis owns media groups and multiple free-to-air TV channels. His tentacles spread far and wide, and as such, he is a difficult man to come up against. Whilst researching the Nor 1 tanker, which was a ship that was intercepted by joint US and Greek authorities in 2014, containing 2.1 tons of heroin, I found myself reading this article, rubbishing the authorities' claims, and particularly the idea that Marinakis had any involvement. It took me a few minutes to realise that the article I was reading was from Evangelos Marinakis' own website. The accusations made against Marinakis stretch far and wide, and I will stress once again before I begin, just in case there is any confusion, that he has never been found guilty of anything in court. Allegations of Marinakis' hegemony within Greek football are fairly straightforward. In addition to accusations of outright match fixing, it is alleged that the shipping magnate uses Olympiacos and his own personal finances in order to exert control over other teams. The club have been accused of using the loan system as a way of influencing particularly lower league teams when they require certain votes to go their way, and they have 19 players out on loan at the time of this recording. More egregious crimes have been alleged by others within the sport, such as referee Petros Konstantineas. Not just a referee, but also a member of the Greek parliament and a key figure in the fight against corruption in Greek football, Konstantineas, alleges that Marinakis' stooges demanded that he throw a game in Olympiacos' favour against Xanthi in January 2012, but that he refused. In addition to his refereeing and parliamentary work, Konstantineas also owns a bakery which was bombed shortly after the incident. Konstantineas believes that Marinakis or his associates were behind the attacks. At one stage, Marinakis and his associates are said to have used prepaid burner phones, a favourite accessory of the innocent, that were registered to Chinese and Pakistani immigrants, because they knew that their phones were being tapped by Greece's National Intelligence Service. The accusations made against Marinakis don't just implicate Olympiacos, but a whole series of clubs believed to be under his sphere of influence. Whilst Marinakis was never charged with any involvement in the Nor 1 heroin seizure, a former Olympiacos board member named Emilios Kotsonas was, receiving life sentences along with 4 other defendants in a high-profile trial. Before his arrest in the 2011-12 season, Kotsonas was recorded in conversation discussing riots at a game between Olympiacos and Panathinaikos, which resulted in Panathinaikos being fined €212,000 and, crucially, being docked 3 points. Olympiacos won the title that season, with Panathinaikos finishing second. It wasn't the first time Marinakis or his fellow Olympiacos board members have been accused of either facilitating or encouraging fan violence for their own means. The criminal proceedings against Marinakis went all the way to the Greek Supreme Court, who dismissed the charges made against him in March 2018. Nonetheless, in April 2019, the Supreme Civil and Criminal Court of Greece decided that there wasn't enough evidence against Marinakis for him to stand trial, along with 27 others for match fixing. A 3-member criminal court came to a decision just last week, acquitting Marinakis and the 27 other defendants of all charges. He was also charged with drug trafficking in March 2018, but a judicial council ruled that the prosecutor's order was not justified. In March 2016, Marinakis was even sued by Panathinaikos owner and fellow ship owner Giannis Alaphousis personally over the Koriopolis scandal. The only action ever taken against Marinakis was a brief ban from footballing activity that saw him step down as Olympiacos president, and he remains the club's vice president and owner obviously, having kept Giannis Morales on as president. As The Guardian pointed out in 2018, under Greek criminal procedure for serious offences, before a case can be referred to trial, a preliminary investigation is followed by a main investigation conducted by an investigating judge. After that investigation has concluded, the judge reports their conclusion to the public prosecutor, who recommends either referral to trial or acquittal to a separate judicial body, the Judicial Council. The Judicial Council makes the final decision as to whether to refer a case for trial or acquit. Nottingham Forest issued their own statement around the same time, clarifying that Marinakis had never been convicted of any criminal offence in any court or tribunal anywhere in the world, which is true, before reaffirming their faith that he remains a fit and proper person to own Nottingham Forest Football Club, the 2-time champions of the European game. Forest are currently embroiled in a relegation scrap and have hardly made any progress since Marinakis arrived in place of the shambolic Fawaz regime. For Greek football fans, they had a scandal with no real consequences, and they are left with a feeling that little has changed. Ultimately, as I said at the start of this video, without the confidence that football is competitive and fair, at least for the 90 minutes in which the ball is on the pitch, it ceases to be special. Every missed penalty and last-minute winner, every red card and trophy, every moment of anguish, despair or ecstasy, without the assurance that what happens on the pitch is 100% legitimate, every emotion that makes football sacred is tainted. And for the people of Greece, ravaged by economic disaster for more than a decade and greatly in need of some escapism, to have the escapism of the nation's most popular sport blighted by, at the very least, accusations and widely held belief that all is not as it seems, that is a great shame. That is it for today's video, but thank you all as ever for watching. Give us a like if you enjoyed the video, let me know your thoughts down below in the comments, and make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications for HITC Sevens. You can also find me on Twitter or Instagram via the username @HITC Sevens on both platforms, should you wish to do so.